The decision that looked wrong until it changed everything. It started as a move so counterintuitive that even the people closest to it felt uneasy. A decision that seemed to violate every rule of smart business. On paper, it looked reckless. In reality, it would quietly rewrite the future. At the time, the company was doing everything right. Revenue was stable. Customers were loyal. Analysts praised its discipline. But beneath the surface, something felt off. Growth had slowed in ways the spreadsheets couldn't explain. Innovation felt careful instead of curious. The business wasn't failing, it was calcifying. To understand why this decision mattered, we have to return to that moment of discomfort, the moment when leadership realized success had become predictable. And in a world changing faster each year, predictability was no longer safety, it was exposure. Competitors were experimenting, customers were evolving, technology was accelerating, and the company's proven playbook was starting to feel outdated. The decision itself was deceptively simple. Remove a feature that generated consistent revenue. Pause an expansion plan investors loved. Redirect resources away from what worked best. It made no sense to the outside world. Internally, it sparked confusion, frustration, even quiet resistance. Why dismantle something that wasn't broken? Because it was broken, just not yet. The leadership team had noticed a pattern others ignored. A shift in customer behavior. So subtle, it barely registered in quarterly reports. A growing friction hidden behind polite satisfaction. Users weren't leaving, but they weren't leaning in either. And that indifference was the most dangerous signal of all. So they chose to act early. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. They stepped away from the path everyone expected and into one no forecast could validate. The decision didn't deliver instant results. In fact, it made things worse at first. Metrics dipped, critics circled, confidence wavered. But this is where the reveal begins. Because that wrong-looking decision wasn't about short-term performance. It was about alignment with a future no one else had fully seen yet. And once that alignment took hold, everything that followed would move in a direction the industry wasn't prepared for. The fallout arrived faster than anyone anticipated. Almost immediately, the numbers told an uncomfortable story. Revenue dipped, engagement softened. Teams that once operated with confidence now questioned the direction they were heading. To the outside world, the decision looked like confirmation of a fatal mistake. Headlines sharpened, analysts downgraded expectations, and competitors quietly celebrated. Inside the company, tension thickened. The removal of the familiar exposed gaps no one had prepared for. Workflow slowed. Customers noticed subtle changes and asked difficult questions. Support teams absorbed frustration. Engineers scrambled to stabilize systems that had been optimized for a model that no longer existed. The safety net was gone, and with it, the illusion of certainty. But beneath the anxiety, something else emerged. With the old structure stripped away, patterns became visible for the first time. Teams began to notice behaviors they had never seen clearly before. Customers explored new paths instead of defaulting to familiar ones. Usage clustered around features that had once been considered secondary. Feedback shifted from passive approval to active demand. The decision hadn't destroyed engagement. It had redirected it. The reveal deepened. Data that once felt noisy now formed a coherent signal. Users weren't resisting change. They were responding to freedom. The remove feature had quietly dictated how people interacted with the product. Without it, customers behaved differently, more intentionally, more creatively, more aligned with emerging needs a company had only theorized about before. Still, the conflict intensified. The transition strained resources. Some teams pushed to restore the old feature to stop the bleeding. Others argued that reversing course would erase the very insight the decision had uncovered. Leadership faced mounting pressure from investors, demanding quick recovery. Every meeting carried the same unspoken question: how long could they afford to be wrong? As weeks passed, the internal divide widened. Trust in the long-term vision clashed with fear of short-term damage. The company stood between two futures, one familiar and safe, one uncertain but promising. And the data alone couldn't resolve the tension. It demanded conviction. Then came a critical moment. A cohort of users, small but highly engaged, began using the product in a way no one had designed for, combining features, creating workflows, extracting value far beyond expectations. Their behavior wasn't accidental. It was a preview, a glimpse of what the product could become if the company committed fully to the new direction. That discovery reframed everything. The wrong-looking decision had not weakened the company. It had removed a constraint. And now, with clarity emerging from the chaos, the team faced a new challenge. Whether they were brave enough to build for the future they had just uncovered, instead of retreating to the comfort of the past. The discovery split the company in two. One side saw proof that the decision had unlocked something real, a new way users wanted to engage, a direction that felt alive instead of managed. The other side saw risk compounding by the day. Revenue was still down, confidence was fragile, and the longer they waited, the harder it would be to reverse course. The conflict moved from strategy decks into the culture itself. Teams that had built the old system felt exposed. Their work, once celebrated, now felt sidelined. Engineers worried the new direction would overload infrastructure never designed for this kind of flexibility. Product leaders argued over priorities, each convinced a different path was the only way to survive. Meetings stretched late into the night, charged with urgency and doubt. Outside the company, pressure intensified. Competitors copied fragments of the old model, hoping to capture the customers the company had unsettled. Analysts framed the decision as a cautionary tale. Investors demanded timelines, forecasts, guarantees, the very things this decision had deliberately abandoned. The company was being judged by rules it had chosen to defy, and then the system began to strain. As the engaged user cohort grew, edge cases multiplied. Performance slowed in unpredictable places. Data pipelines buckled under new usage patterns. A hidden architectural limitation, long masked by the predictability of the old feature, surfaced without warning. What had once been a theoretical risk became a tangible threat. The emotional peak arrived in a single meeting. A live test failed under a load far smaller than projected growth. Dashboards flashed red. The room fell silent. The implication was clear. The company had discovered a future it couldn't yet support. And unless they acted, the very behavior that validated their bold decision would destroy them. The choice was brutal. They could restore the old feature, stabilize the business, and walk away from the insight they had uncovered. Or they could double down, rebuild the core of the system to support this new mode of use, knowing it would be costly, risky, and impossible to explain to anyone demanding short-term certainty. This was the real conflict, not between success and failure, but between comfort and conviction, between retreating to what had worked and committing to what might work far better. The decision that once looked wrong now demanded something even harder than courage. It demanded transformation. They chose transformation, not because it was safe, not because it was popular, but because the evidence, hidden beneath fear and noise, was impossible to ignore. The future they had uncovered was fragile, unfinished, and demanding, but it was real, and restoring the old feature would only preserve a past that was already slipping away. The rebuild began quietly. Engineers dismantled assumptions embedded deep in the system's core. Workflows were redesigned around flexibility instead of control. Data pipelines were rewritten to support behavior that had never existed before. What once felt like edge cases became the new center. It was slow, expensive, and deeply uncomfortable, exactly the opposite of what the market expected. Then something changed. As the new foundation took shape, performance stabilized. The system no longer resisted the behavior users naturally gravitated toward. Instead, it amplified it. The engaged cohort expanded. New use cases emerged organically. Adoption climbed, not explosively, but steadily, sustainably. The product felt less like a tool and more like an environment built for how people actually worked. This was the climax. The decision that once looked reckless revealed its full meaning. It wasn't rejection of success. It was a refusal to be limited by it. By letting go early, the company had created space to evolve before evolution was forced upon them. And in doing so, they reached a scale their original roadmap could never have supported. In the resolution, the narrative flipped. Analysts revised their stories. Competitors scrambled to understand what had shifted. Investors returned, this time following momentum instead of questioning direction. But inside the company, the lesson was already clear. The breakthrough didn't come from perfect timing or flawless execution. It came from acting before certainty arrived, from trusting signals others dismissed. What looked wrong was simply early. And that early decision became the foundation for everything that followed, a reminder that in business, the most dangerous moment isn't failure. It's staying successful just long enough to stop listening. Subscribe to join the journey. The